Session, Frontline Storytelling, War Reporting Across Mediums. How can we capture the immediacy of war through video, photographs, and words? In the recent years, conflicts have been continuing to erupt, but what was the fundamental change is how we can access and experience the teams. Thanks to the rise of the social media and mobile technology, scenes from the front lines are more visible than ever. This session will examine the evolving role of media and the filmmakers, and these are journalists, and you'll meet them in a second, how we can do that. So here at the panel, here on my left is Annie Schletbrod, a journalist. Next to her sitting Nuha Adjumanait, not particularly journalist, but you made an amazing project together called What's Unsaid for the New Humanitarian. And on my left, on your right, is Patrick Haley, who is the co-founder of Global Witness, and later on made an impressive book on all his investigations you did worldwide. And we're going to talk about that. Thank you very much for being here. My name is Margriet de Koning. I'm the artistic director of Movies That Matter, based in the Netherlands, and it's an honor to moderate this session. So before we dive into what you all have been doing, can I start with the two of you? Give a little bit of your CV, what you've been doing. Give us a glance shortly that we know, and how you got together. Yes, please. Annie, can I start with you?
Sure. My name is Annie Slamrad. My job title is Middle East editor at the New Humanitarian, which is a nonprofit news organization that focuses on humanitarian crises, which means a lot of things. But for me, I've been working sort of in and on the Middle East for about 10 years, and increasingly frustrated as I worked a lot on Yemen, which was until fairly recently the world's worst humanitarian crisis, sort of increasingly frustrated by what journalists could and couldn't really capture with traditional news stories, both because it's extremely dangerous for Yemeni journalists to work, and it's extremely hard for foreign journalists to access, and really when they do, you only hear sort of snippets, a few voices here and there. So this is where Nuha comes into the picture. The project that we did together is called the Yemen Listening Project, and it features stories in people's own words in Arabic and English from about 100 Yemenis about how the war there has impacted their lives. So Nuha and I came together because I had this idea, but I wasn't really sure if it was a good idea. And I knew that if we were going to do this, it needed to be really run by and with the creative control and impact of Yemenis. And I was looking for someone to coordinate it with me, and we were at a conference about Yemen, yes. And I, sort of a mutual friend, I was saying, oh, I have this idea. I'm looking for a person who has these sort of skills, is really good with people. And he was like, hold on, I know the person. And she was in the next room. And that's,
you came in.
And that's how I met Nuha.
Yes, tell me.
Yeah, so when we met in this conference about Yemen about 2 years ago.
The peace conference, right?
Yeah, in The Hague. Yeah. And we had this small discussion about the whole idea, how the initiative and the idea is explored, and I really felt like, yeah, this is something that I really want to be a part of. Coordinating this project was, of course, one of the most important things that happened in my career. I worked with Yemenis, and I worked with people who cares about Yemen as well. We had worked together, prepared, built a strategy, how to access, how to reach out to people, what to do, and we made lots of effort on it.
Okay, I'll stop you there for a sec. So I'd like to introduce Patrick, who is a veteran in the field of investigating through journalism, through different means. So your first big project was in Cambodia, as I remember correctly. Could you fill us in, please?
Sure, veteran is another word for an old man, but anyway.
Yeah.
Yeah, back in 1993, I met two people as we volunteered for an environmental organisation, and we got together really because we were all interested in Cambodia, coincidentally, which at that time was in the midst of a civil war and the biggest UN peacekeeping operation ever until that date. And we'd heard news reports that the Khmer Rouge rebel group, who you may have heard of, were trading in rainforest timber with Thailand. And we thought, is that a human rights problem or is that an environmental problem? And of course, the answer is both, but no organisation then looked at both. There's a dichotomy. And so we created this organisation. We had no experience, no money, and decided we would go to the Thai-Cambodia border, posing as timber buyers, and see if we could document that trade, which to our great surprise we managed to do, and to close it down and cut funding to the Khmer Rouge. That's how we began. It's been a long career, so I can't go into all of it, but essentially it started off around resources, natural resources, funding conflict, and using that information that we got to get policymakers, lawmakers to change laws.
Yeah, and you're also known, for people to know, you're also known for what you did on the Blood Diamond, so to speak,
Yeah.
which not a very big grew. And so how did you then operate? Like you had local people on the ground doing undercover research, or how did that work? Because you weren't living in Cambodia, nor you were living in the other countries, of course.
Yeah, so in Cambodia, we couldn't go to Western Cambodia because the Khmer Rouge occupied it and they killed Westerners. Yeah. So we went to the Thai border region, which is kind of a bit mafia-controlled. But posing as timber buyers, we thought that's some protection because they think they can make money from us. We knew nothing about timber, but anyway, we managed to get away with it. Diamonds was different. We started looking at Angola, but then back in that period, Liberia, Angola, and Sierra Leone were ripped apart by civil wars funded by diamonds, and all the diamonds were being bought by a UK, South African company, De Beers, 80% of the world's rough diamonds. And so we got information from local people, journalists, diplomats in Angola. We couldn't go, that was a really bloody civil war. We couldn't go into the field. But it was easy on one level in that the main target was in London, De Beers.
And that was that time, whereas if we jump to this time, there wasn't social media the way we're having now. So if you would do it, we'll maybe think about that question, that if you would do that now, that would be a totally different ball game in terms of what you can do on social media, internet, and so on. So it would be a very different way nowadays to report from the front line. But then going back to you, I mean, Yemen is obviously breaking our hearts. It's a forgotten war because we're all in different places, but there has been reported. So what was it for you to think, like, we need to find another angle to have another kind of report where it's a need? How did you, it was your personal, it's a very interesting chance.
Yeah,
I'm going to sit a little bit from, because I don't see your face. Yeah.
It's okay.
Sorry about that. To think like we want to hear people's voices. So what you've been doing, just to fill in very quickly, as I understand, correct me if I'm wrong, so what it's been doing is you set out on internet, on social media, questions and asking people to bring their own stories because these weren't told, right? Am I correct in that? And you felt that we have to fill in that gap, which goes far beyond the direct journalism.
Yeah, I think it's a different kind of journalism.
Yeah.
I mean, the reason it's called the Yemen Listening Project is because of the idea that journalists need to maybe talk less and drive the story less and listen more. And, you know, you said Yemen is a forgotten conflict. Hundreds of thousands of people have been killed over the last 10 years, not just, you know, we talk about the front lines of war. People have not just been killed by bombs and bullets, although, yes, they have, but also hunger.
Famine is big.
Yeah, a famine was never technically declared, but massive malnutrition and diseases like cholera, which can be easily treated, but because people can't get treatment. So I think it's also, I think maybe a better word is ignored war. So one of the things, and humanitarian crisis, so one of the things that was frustrating as a journalist is I know that Yemenis have a lot to say. I know that people like Nuha and people she knows certainly have a voice. I don't need to give them a voice, but what is a way to sort of platform that voice and hear the stories that, again, I wouldn't hear if I were just reporting on famine or if I were just reporting on, so that's how we came up with the idea of asking people for their own stories.
And how did that work? Because you had questions maybe, or how did you navigate that to get the questions to the people, or or your whole project to the people?
So we had one question and Nuha got it out.
Only one question. We wanted to ask only one question to all of people and let them figure out how do they want to answer. Everyone
the
has
question?
How did the war impacted your life? So it's a general one and very specific at the same time. We didn't try to influence their answer. We just heard what they said and documented down.
But you had some parameters, like what you were saying, no more than, but if I'm
yes,
correct,
we had set some guidelines, let's say, or limitations, because we wanted also everyone to have an equal chance. So we limited that to 300 words if they are writing them, and 3 minutes talk if they are recording the stories. So the purpose also of that is to give us chance to listen to more than one, to gather the information and not to be we didn't want them to send very long stories and then we end up with 1,000 rather than 100.
And did you have to select? How did that go?
It was really hard, of course. We've tried to make it diversified, inclusive as well. We did want gender balance voices. We chose from different governorates. We chose from different also topics, which are the hot topics that are, for instance, the siege, the famine, if we have, for example, 3 or 4 voices talking about the same topic, we choose one of them.
Okay. Yeah.
So
But also love stories, and you were saying about
yes.
woman
So
and
it was not only about sad stories or the general idea that war impacted people in a very negative way, or I didn't want that people think about Yemen only it is a famine or it's an they need only humanitarian aid. People in Yemen needs more than that, far beyond. It is more than a war. Yemen is more than a war. There are people who left their countries, and there is mind immigration. Very good skills have immigrated. So this is also one of the stories that people outside Yemen also told.
So it was only not on the ground in Yemen. You also had people.
No, we
from
had
all
people all over the world.
People
Yemeni people who are also outside Yemen and were impacted by the war. They had to tell their stories. We have, for instance, one story that told us that he couldn't come back to Yemen to the American one, the Yemeni, to get married. Yeah. So it was one of the love stories that they finally met in Aden, and it was really how the war impacted them. We had also a very successful stories, like for a woman that opened a cake shop or a homemade cakes. She started selling cakes, and after her husband died. So it's also resilience. People are figuring out how to do things. We had also lots of stories that are inspirational to us and to people. It's not only about war, and it's more about Yemeni people are losing their lives. They are losing their social cohesion. So it's lots of stories. It's about mental health as well, problems.
But if you say the listening, that you're the listening project, I don't know how you feel, but then it's very hard to make that in like 3 minutes or 300 words, because listening means that somebody can tell their whole story. So how did you deal with that? It's like it's a snippet of maybe. How did you?
Look, as an editor, I would have, and as a person who likes to listen, I would have preferred, that we could listen. I think so many of the stories we probably could have spoken for hours, and there were whole stories behind them.
Yeah.
But we did want these to be stories because we had different audiences that we wanted to reach, and we published 100 stories on our site. We did it also in different ways on podcasts and on Al Jazeera that had sort of more selected and more animated stories. But because we wanted, one of our audiences that we wanted to reach was a Yemeni audience, the website, if you look at it, is pretty low tech. So people submitted their own photos. We didn't send photographers.
You couldn't listen, right? You couldn't interview them.
No, well, in some cases, I mean, so the way that we got the word out, the Nuha got the word out is of course, before everything happened with Twitter, I was like, we'll just put out some tweets and people will respond, which was a very bad idea. And
why?
Well, because I can tell you about 100 reasons why. But I mean, Nuha was like, okay, first of all, we need to use Facebook. Yemenis use Facebook. And I was like, no, only my grandma uses Facebook, but it turns out that no, in Yemen.
In Yemen, people mostly use Facebook and WhatsApp as a main connection.
Yeah.
And
so
also
you did that through that, and how
through the Facebook page, and also through the WhatsApp Yemeni WhatsApp number. It is easier for them. In some governorates, we had to hire some journalists to interview people who wanted to, because it was hard to get to people in that particular governorate. So we did our best to reach out to different and diversified groups in Yemen.
And how were the reactions?
It depends. It depends. I think one of the things that was at least helping us to get out those stories is that because I am Yemeni, so people would feel maybe more confident to share their story with someone like them, sharing the same more or less background or language, speak the same language, familiar, easy.
But they don't talk to each other, right? Or after, maybe. Were they, so they all brought the stories to you?
No, you mean the people?
Yeah.
They have reached out to me through the WhatsApp number. I was
you
managing.
Were the
right.
Which is interesting to say about you, that you're actually in HR.
Yeah.
Yes.
That's your profession, right? And
yeah,
that's
so working in HR I have acquired lots of skills that were reflexive in this project as well, dealing with people, knowing how to deal with different personalities as well, being sensitive with how to ask the question, also listen carefully to what they want, interpret what the story is, and summarize it into a small story.
And then I come to you, Petra. If I understand you correctly, you did interview them live. I mean, through the devices or not, and then they put on the small.
So no, it depended. So we gave people options. The sort of theme of the project, if you want, at least in my head, was let's meet people where they're at. So if people wanted to send in voice notes and that's it, that's fine. If people want to submit it, we had a form. They can submit it in their language. They can, again, if people want to send paintings, okay, great, they did. If people want to send poems, fabulous, they can. There were some people who reached out with questions for Nuha, which is another thing. Okay, I want to understand why you're doing this project. In which case, again, I think actually Nuha not being a journalist was a great asset to this project because journalists maybe think in a very specific way, but there were some people, some places that I think people have extra fear maybe of speaking to the media, or we just didn't manage to break through for a variety of reasons. In those cases, we did hire local journalists, but they were also instructed not to do interviews, to explain the project and say,
do your thing, do your own thing. So the listening was more on an abstract level than directly what you do with documentary, for instance. You interview
certainly different,
and then you edit that.
Yeah.
That's a different one. And for you, listening is the interpretation of listening is in a totally different field. So you wrote a book on the very bad people, am I correct? Yeah, very bad people. I thought that was quite a bold title in itself. So to listen to maybe not these very bad people, just the people around, to underline who is bad and who is not bad, so to speak. How did you do that in relationship to listening?
It depended on where we were. In some cases, it was very difficult for local people to talk to us, because if they were seen talking to us, they'd be in deep trouble. But one example is going back to the civil war in Liberia, for example, when we were approached by a Liberian guy. This is at a time when Liberia was ruled by a dictatorship, Charles Taylor, and he said, you need to come and look at Liberia. They're exporting rainforest timber to Europe, to China, and that's what's funding this dictatorship. We couldn't go to Liberia. 4 journalists were arrested and sentenced to death there, thankfully got away. But this guy, Silas, he did 2 things which are really interesting. One of which is he knew someone in the UN who were there, and they let him use, there was no email in Liberia at that time, so they let him use theirs. So he could communicate occasionally like that. But also he got we got some funding to him. We had to meet him physically outside the country and give him the cash. And he hired 4 people who worked in the main timber company's office in the port. And so they got all of the information firsthand about how much timber was coming in, which ships were taking it out, where they were going. And then
just for the time framing in terms of...
So this was back in 2000, 2001.
Okay.
And so, for example, we then teamed up with Greenpeace, and as those ships would arrive in France, the Rainbow Warrior would come and intercept them and get, we were tiny, we had no means of getting publicity. Greenpeace did, and so it really started focusing attention on that trade, which ended up with UN Security Council sanctions stopping that trade. So that's just one example, and one other I'd just say is that following the tragic and horrible murder of one of our colleagues back in 2012, a forest activist in Cambodia, we thought, how many people like that, how many environmental defenders, as we call them, are killed every year? And so we started documenting that. And that was very much through talking to local people, looking at local press, whatever source we could get. And then we had to really hone down to, it sounds a bit brutal, to make sure that their deaths were because of their defending
That was
work.
hard to prove, or what you mean?
I'm sorry?
That was hard to prove.
Yeah. Well,
sometimes.
it is hard to prove because they could be killed for many reasons. It has to be that one. And we came up with, in that first year we did that in a very rushed report, 4 people a week, which is vastly underreported. And we're now sort of over 10 years from that point. But we produce an annual report every year. And that report now is widely quoted by anyone really, the European Union and the UN or whatever, when they're saying X amount of environmental defenders are killed every year. That's from our reports, but our reports are from this massive amount of people who are in a very much riskier position than we are to get that information to us.
So if you compare the 2 views, like you're really having the goal to investigate and get these very bad people. In one way or another, what was the goal? To get them behind bars? What should we think of? What does it mean, these very bad people?
Okay, well, so
in relationship to what you've been investigating.
Yeah, so 2 goals, I guess. One of which is to get laws changed. So, for example, with blood diamonds, an international treaty was created to take diamonds out of conflict. Right now in Europe, we and many other organizations have worked on the handily named Corporate Supply Chain Due Diligence Initiative, which means that any raw material coming into Europe has to be free of human and environmental rights harm, which is, a very powerful tool if it's still yet to manifest itself. But also, yes, we like to get bad guys. For me, that's a major motivation. And if we can get them in prison, if we can get them fined an awful lot of money for whatever it is they do, then we'll do that. The downside of that is they also want to get us.
And there's the other one from the famous Brody, a lawyer from New York, saying if you have 1 person goes behind bars, if you have 10 persons, they go into prison. Maybe if you kill, if you get 100,000 people, you just get exiled in another country because they keep it together. So how many did get in the end?
Well,
nailed down.
Well, two sort of notable examples would be, Charles Taylor, who we can't take total credit for that, but we were part of...
Brody did the
we
case,
cut his funding, and he's now doing a life sentence in the UK. His chief timber buyer, who was prosecuted in the Netherlands, but has yet to be extradited from South Africa. But one powerful thing we found, like there's one guy called Dan Gertler, an Israeli mining tycoon in Democratic Republic of Congo, who's terribly corrupt. And he's the gatekeeper to anyone like Glencore, any massive company who wants to do mining in Congo has to go through this guy. So we managed to get him sanctioned by the US, which means the mining industry is carried out in US dollars. So it's kind of caused him a lot of annoyance. I've no doubt with the current administration they'll probably get around to lifting those sanctions. But so basically we just want to try and stop them operating, and if we can get them in prison, but that's a
hot
rare
one,
thing.
as we know. The more powerful they are,
Yeah.
I mean, like you see that with the ICC, the International Criminal Court in The Hague, how hard it is in the end of the day to get them behind bars. But we were talking also about how it's reported from the front line, so the direct reporting, like what we're seeing now in the two big wars which are going on at the moment. If I go back to you, so are you trying to form this idea, like what you're doing now in Yemen, to bring it to other countries? To what is your, if you look a bit, if you have a glance of where you would like to go?
Well, I mean, we were approached, I think one of the most exciting things for me about the project was Nuha and I, as you know, we were talking about it for months and months, I think before we even started collecting stories, and we thought, what are we going to do if the stories are all really political and it's really not that interesting to an audience?
To your goal anyway, it's interesting political stories.
It will be interesting, but like really insidery. What are we going to do? And it was absolutely the opposite of that. People, I think Nuha can speak more to this, but people really wanted to talk and they wanted to tell all sorts of things. And another thing is that after the project came out, we had a lot of people saying, can we do the Sudan listening project with you? Can we do the Syria listening project with you? Of course, I want to do all of the listening projects. Funding is a bit of a thing. Maybe right now even more of a thing, given the US cuts to aid and all sorts of, we're a donor-funded organization. And it takes time and emotional bandwidth and an investment. So we can't do them all, but we did, I'm trying, I guess my own journalistic practice is heading in more of a listening direction. So we just published the New Humanitarian, something called the Lebanon Displacement Diaries, which is 10 people telling their own stories of displacement mostly during the 3 months of until late November last year, when Israel was bombing Lebanon quite heavily. And the point of that story, which not the point of, but what came out through listening to these people, and again, them telling their own stories in their own words and not really directing them, letting them tell about what they wanted to tell, like their homes and what they missed the most and their pets, and what they brought with them, and things maybe you just wouldn't think of when you think of a war. I think what came through was a much stronger story, and one that, for me, what became the tagline of it, which is at the end of the war is not the end of a story, because often when there's a ceasefire, like there's still bombing, and even if there isn't, you're still impacted by what happens.
Of course you are.
And that came through in Yemen as well, where people talked about the impact on them even when there wasn't bombing, and they talked about things that we didn't expect. But we still do traditional reporting, and I do encourage reporters to listen more, and there are lots of different ways, I think, to incorporate that into journalistic practice, into investigative practice. It doesn't have to be a 100-person massive project.
And what was the reason? Because I don't know if somebody's here familiar with it. There is a film made now in Gaza. It's from Ground Zero, where people within Gaza made with their mobile phones filmed their own lives or made a little fiction or something. It's a devastating, hardship-full film to watch. So what was your reason to only do it listening and no image attached to it? Is it security reason, or is it that I don't know, I think it's also in a sort of podcast, as I understood, partly. The reason to choose for voice and not voice and image, because voice and image nowadays, it's very easy to do, but it could be very dangerous. But
It's because we wanted people to be able to submit however they wanted. So we knew that we weren't going to be there. So some people did put themselves on camera.
Oh, they did?
Yes.
Okay.
We had some videos. People felt comfortable to share our videos.
And they were okay with their face being
yes.
recognized.
People were.
Very limited numbers. But we wanted people to feel comfortable to submit their story the way they like, the way they feel convenient with.
Yeah.
And we make it accessible to them. whoever wants to get to WhatsApp and it's easier, contact us with the WhatsApp.
Yeah, that's the big strength of what you're doing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So we did have some stories on videos. And also I wanted to highlight a point, which is we wanted people to tell the world and other people their stories by themselves. Most of the Yemeni stories or the war has been told by politicians, media, journalists, political activists, but not normal people just like me or other people, like with their own language, with their own sufferings. So I believe that this is even sometimes stronger because it comes out from their own experience and their own sufferings without any agenda or any like purpose behind it. So yeah, it was.
You filled the gap because, of course, well, you see it here at the festival. There are many documentaries where also a lot of totally normal, if you could call it normal, but not out of their professions, let's put it that way, being captured on the big screen. But you felt like that's different again, or it's edited some sort of.
You know, I think giving people options, and because being on a big screen or being on a sort of uncomfortable chair, not everybody is super comfortable in that way.
Yeah.
And especially in Yemen, where it's very dangerous.
That's
often
a very good point.
we wanted people from all over the country, and in some places it's not safe to tell a story, even if you're telling a story about your cake business.
Yes.
And so I think for when we planned the way the project would look, we said, okay, we know most of them are not going to have photos because most people don't want to be in a photo. They want to. Some people did, and that was great. But we planned that in advance, and I think Yemenis. I mean, people really wanted to tell their stories. They just maybe didn't want to tell the story in the way that maybe a documentarian wants to tell it.
Yes.
And I think
and we had also only one thing, if you remember, Annie, we gave them the choice of not saying their names. We could, yes, because some people really felt like, I would tell my story, but I don't want my name to be there. I want also to tell you that Yemen is a kind of conservative community with lots of restrictions, where women are a little bit shy to be on the social media. Not everyone is the same. So you would find cultural differences within the same community. So we wanted everyone to have an equal chance to say their story comfortably and feel.
That's obviously the big difference when you have the documents made here.
Exactly.
So you gave everybody a chance.
Everyone
to
has
talk.
a chance to talk, and we reassured them. Like when people try to ask us, is it safe to tell my story? Are you going to put my name? I don't want to put my name. I reassure people, no, your name won't appear if you don't want to. So at the end, what matters is get your voice heard, with you also being comfortable and protected as well.
And do you think of, so this is very short, the words is very short, 350 words, if I remember correctly, 3 minutes. And do you think of something like that people could talk longer? I mean, the technique is endless.
I mean, people wanted to talk endlessly.
And
people that's what I mean. Like,
was
we're talking here for an hour already.
That was exciting. People really wanted to talk.
Yes, they wanted more, of course, and they were really sometimes frustrated. Why 3 minutes?
Yeah.
And but of course, when there is also a limitation, people would focus on what they really want and convey the message. And
before I go back to you, Petra, were there stories you were like you said before when we talked before that for you it was also déjà vu, bittersweet, you know, to hear the stories. Were there stories, just to give us a bit of an idea? We were not going to listen to something, I think, but if what was a story you were like, wow, I never thought to get this out of. Can you give us 1 or 2 examples?
Yeah, so one of those examples, for instance, I really remember is that in general, when I worked on this project, I had this lots of triggers that triggered me. I had to go sometimes through again the same pain of traumas, So you talked about emotional labor and the importance of, we had our chickens, like I appreciated the way Annie approached me every now and then to make sure that I'm in a good state of mental health. Do you still want to continue? Do you need help from our side? So this is also appreciated from like people who are working with you. So I remember one of the stories for the grocery shop or something he was selling, and like a woman came to him asking for milk, like she didn't have money to pay with, and he gave her milk, although he has nothing to do, like so you can imagine how that
solidarity
sort of painful. People are helping each other although they don't have money to do it, and there are people who are outside Yemen as well who kept on not buying lots of clothes. Not I don't Duha from Jordan, I think. She said from Amman. She said, I don't know for how long I will be sitting here, so I'm not settled. I'm not buying so much clothes because I think I'm going back to Yemen. I'm not buying. I'm not doing this. I'm not doing that because I'm going back to Yemen. So this is exactly how I felt for a long time. I don't.
Before you got to the Netherlands.
Exactly.
Or
so,
in the Netherlands.
As a refugee.
As a refugee, I am a refugee. I came
Yeah.
to the Netherlands as a refugee. So I have this question inside me all the time. Well, I won't do this because I might go back to my country. So it's really a painful thing because you don't enjoy the moment and live, and you keep on having hope to come back to your country, and you feel painful how the country is. And I never felt the belonging to the place that I'm living in. And it's such a painful feeling. And people who told their stories have the same, people who are outside country, I mean. They are.
So the project is also not only about informing the world. I mean, I know you did it in Arab, and for the world, for globally, you edited it, as I understand correctly. But it's really also to comfort each other.
Yeah, I mean, Yemen, in the country which has been at war for so long, the media infrastructure is completely decimated and completely separated by different warring parties. So, you know, even though people who live outside the country,
or
like
inside.
Nuha or inside, I think, you know, we were hoping, I don't know if empathy is the right word, but to build that this would be a way of people realizing that what they went through is not actually that different than what someone else went
it's
through.
about social cohesion. We wanted to make it more that your pain is my pain as well. I'm outside, you're inside. I feel like survival guilt, and you feel the misery of war. So even people from inside, within the same country, different parties, they are suffering the same thing because our needs at the end are
the same
one.
and the same. That's
Yes,
what
we all need to be safe. We all need service, good education, good food, security. So that will raise up also the awareness of people that peace is a must.
Yeah. I think we all agree on that, but we're far away, as it seems like that. If, with all due respect, I'd like to jump to Patrick one more time, or not one more time again. How are they working now? I mean, I know you're not retired, but you stepped down a little bit. But if you compare to when you were there, and now, I mean, there's a big discussion anyway in the documentary world about who's telling the story, working with local people, but journalists. But it can be very, very dangerous, especially the sort of field you're working or your colleagues are working. So how do you deal with that? I mean, that must have been very different from when you were like in the 90s and where we are now in because of social media. I mean, we've seen so many journalists being killed, especially now also in Gaza, but all around the world. 24 is the year where the most journalists have been killed, and that's maybe part to do with brutality, but also maybe with the social media, that everything is more accessible and more visible. I don't know, but what is your take on that? Like how it's nowadays?
Yeah, it's a really interesting point. To put this in context, when we started out, there were 3,000 websites in the world, and there are 1.5 billion now.
Half billion, yeah.
So everything has changed. But one of the things we do, and I was prompted to talk about this by what you guys were just saying, is that we, for example, in Brazil, in the Philippines, so looking at this issue of environmental defenders, we've made a few films. In fact, we haven't. We've commissioned local filmmakers to go out and put together a documentary. We're trying to find the money for them to do it. Just like 10-minute documentaries, something like that. And in two cases, one was a small village in Brazil where people are being pushed off their land by cattle farmers, and it's a shooting war. You know, they're getting killed in numbers there. So we pick on one family who lost a family member, and then they'd talk about, the community would come and talk about what their community was like, what it is like, what their problems are. In the Philippines, it was a grandmother who was killed for objecting against a port, and talk to her family, the same kind of thing. And what we would do is try and screen those films at the annual climate change meetings.
Okay.
And we would get funding to bring some of the people in those films to those meetings. And then we would invite the country delegates to be there and see it and talk to those people directly. So this isn't just a number. This is a real person, this is a real family, this is a real community.
So that's how you use the impact, the film and the impact of the film on the political level.
Yeah, and the other impact of that is that those communities, and it's not just because of us, because there are many organizations working on this kind of thing, but we contribute, start talking to each other. You know, someone in the Philippines starts talking to someone in Brazil, starts talking to someone in India, talking to someone in Myanmar.
Having the same problem on environmental issues, for instance.
Yeah, this kind of environmental issue that leads you to be murdered, whatever it happens to be. And it's usually about the defense of their way of life.
And then you, as an organization, you bring them together, so that's your role then, more than doing the investigation yourself.
Yeah,
or you go alongside, or how should I see that?
We still do investigations, but this is kind of an extra strand of work, because we see that as something, you know, and this is something we've learned as we went along, because we didn't know, when we started, we had no experience of anything, you know. The story is much better told by the people affected, as you're talking about, if you can. You know, if they can't speak for security reasons or whatever, then we'll tell it. If they can talk about it, then we'll try and help them talk about it.
To help them talk. And that changed over time?
Oh, that's absolutely changed over time. And, you know, we make obviously full use of social media and data investigations. And we can do investigations now that we could never have done then. Like looking at...
What is the biggest difference?
Well, for example, we did a report on this particular, the world's biggest beef company, it's called JBS, operates in Brazil. Well, it operates all over the world, but its home base is Brazil. And we thought, okay, they're not allowed to have cattle in rainforest, in protected areas. So we got satellite maps of protected areas. Then we got satellite maps of their farms and how that
But that you could never have done
areas.
in the 90s.
But the thing that you couldn't have done is to get cattle movement orders. So every cow in Brazil has a movement order from birth to death. So you know where it goes. And we downloaded 3 million of them from the state website and overlaid that on those maps.
Okay.
And so you can say, well, you guys are lying.
Yeah, here's proof. Here's
Yeah,
proof.
I just wanted to add one thing as well, talking about impact. You know, again, in various countries I've worked in, like Cambodia and many in Africa, the other impacts you can think about are things like landmines. They're still picking up unexploded ordnance from the Vietnam War, or World War II even. And so these countries are just full of explosives. That's just something else.
Sorry,
full of explosives, unexploded explosives, which is a massive impact on people's lives.
Landmines.
Yeah, people definitely spoke about that.
Yeah, they spoke us about landmines. And we had also one story about people who lost his leg, someone who lost his leg because of the landmines in Yemen.
And he sent a picture.
And he sent a picture, a small video for himself. Yeah.
It was interesting, I think, that people, I mean, what you said, I think people usually can tell their stories better than we can often, depending on the format and, you know, who you want the audience to be. But what you mentioned about personal stories, you know, sort of like telling a story of a family is something that I think is really interesting, because getting people to care about Yemen, I mean, as anybody who knows me or has worked with me for a while knows that I could maybe lecture about Yemen for a long time, but it doesn't actually work. I think what works, I mean, I think getting the Yemeni audience maybe wasn't as much of a challenge, because, I mean, it was a challenge. It took a lot of work. But to get this audience, which is sort of a broader, globally curious
Yeah.
audience, which, as Nuha knows, I call my mom, who's someone, I mean, quite literally, like, interested in the news, reads the headlines, but she's not gonna, really doesn't have the time to invest probably in learning a really complicated conflict. What brings her in is personal stories.
Yeah.
Stuff that's like, I can relate to that. That person is, oh, I also worry about my education. You know, this is something that, you know, and I think it sounds like similar to what you guys are doing at Global Witness now.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Are there questions from the audience? Otherwise, we can talk of really, yeah, please. Is there a mic for you? Or speak really loud and I repeat the question. I don't know if it's okay.
I have a loud voice.
Oh yeah, you have a very loud
Great.
voice. Go ahead.
I was gonna, and I don't know exactly how to form this question. It's like a bit in my head though a little bit. You work at a humanitarian and you work for Double Witness's NGO. I was gonna ask, like, as journalists, what your guys' relationship is, especially like now we see in the States, I think they've given their hand, like with legacy media. And if there's a way, because I mean, this is about like, when I look at like reporting across the mediums, being on the front lines, right? You guys are usually sharing these humanitarian stories, and stated from your stories earlier, there's usually like very vested powers and high interests who maybe even have ties to these legacy medias. So what's your guys' experience with this? Is this like avoided at all costs? Are there ways that you guys leverage legacy media or have ties to? Like I heard from Chris Hedges that there's like a little bit of like a dance that they do with. Okay, perfect.
Oh, well, we can hear you just
for
fine.
people listening online, you know, they can hear it better.
What your guys' relationship is with legacy media? I mean, obviously for both of you, you guys have decided to maybe go more NGO or more starting your own thing route. So yeah, maybe if you guys speak on this. It's not a super pointed question.
No, it's not a super pointed question, but Patrick, yeah, oh, you? Yeah, well, go ahead. Go ahead,
Okay.
Annie. Yeah?
I mean, yeah, it's obviously different now, but I have worked for legacy media or whatever you want to, I never know what the right word for that. You know, in that case, of course, you have advertisers and you have owners with, I mean, I'm American in case you can't tell, so that clearly is changing the way news happens and is reported and what you can report and what the editorial direction is. That's true in a lot of places. We have the luxury of not having advertisers and that there's a very clear firewall for us between the donors and the editorial side, so they really can't tell us what to do. That said, you know, we want eyeballs on, if it's eyeballs or ears or, you know, whatever, we want people to take in the content. So we do have, for this project, we did have a partnership with Al Jazeera because we knew that that would get out to a very large audience. But we were very clear, I want to, because they had to edit some things down, I need to be very clear that things are not changed in a way that would change the content of the story, that the quotes are, they were fine with it. But I mean, it is something that happens when we do partner with bigger media organizations, especially in our case, it's often very targeted because we want to reach a specific audience. And I think that's fine. They often have, you know, we know a lot more people are going to read it and then hopefully come back and maybe they'd want to read the 100 stories, whereas the 5 stories that they saw illustrated on Al Jazeera.
5 stories, they did just a few.
Yeah. It was like a map where this story came from the map of Yemen. So you could press on it, have the story, read it on the
and it was on their website.
Yeah, Al Jazeera English.
Yeah, and frankly, they have more resources than us too. That's another, you know, great opportunity.
It's opening up a whole other world, obviously. And for you?
Yeah, I mean, it's multifarious, really. So when the big media companies started cutting budgets for investigative journalists, we began able to access hiring really good investigative journalists. So that was a boon for us, but a tragedy for society in general. I think it's one of the biggest problems about legacy media, as you call it. And we also work with journalists who are still in the game. So we did a massive, I touched on it earlier, a massive investigation into corruption in mining in DR Congo. And we work closely with Haaretz newspaper in Israel and Bloomberg, because their Kinshasa-based correspondent knew far more about the political interplays than we. So there's actually working with them to produce the story. And of course, regardless of those relationships, we always try and get our stories in the press because we know that politicians, when they're making a decision about something, do take into account do the public know about it? If it's not in the press, politicians are less likely to do something. And so to have it in the press is good, and for us, yes, for sure, get it as widely as we can in legacy media, but also through social media.
Is that an answer to your question? Yeah? Okay.
Start anyway.
Well, you can, are there other questions in the audience for now? Not really? Yeah? Yeah, you have a question in the back?
So about the Yemen project, you mentioned that you wanted to focus on human stories, not on like political opinions or whatever. Was
The listening project, yeah.
was it because you assumed it wouldn't be interesting, or is like why did you choose that focus basically?
I mean, we didn't choose a focus, as in if people wanted to tell, because we said, we had this one question, how has the war impacted your life? It was just that when we were talking to each other, we were thinking it's not going to be that interesting. Like, if I'm being honest, if people are just sort of, it's generally maybe not that interesting if people are telling, you were using it as a political platform or something like that.
Yeah.
But it turned out really, I mean, for me, it just turned out that's not what people wanted to say, I think, which was exciting.
Yeah, our question was general, and we didn't want to emphasize or put the focus on one area or another. We wanted people to just tell how the war impacted their lives. And I think, this is my own opinion, people have been fed up or saturated from how their stories or their suffering is being pluralized or being told to serve, for example, political party or another. So they got like that chance to tell what they want, and we made sure that your words are going to be put the way it is. We're not editing, we're not putting our input on it. So they chose general subjects, which was also surprising for us.
Yeah, because you thought maybe you could get like really political statements.
could have been
Yes, it could be. It could. And
people talked about stuff that I had
Sorry?
people talked about things that we, honestly, as a person who's reported on conflict for a really long time, I did not suspect. I suspected a lot of them, but the amount of times that people talked about how frustrating and how difficult it was that their education was interrupted.
Yeah.
And
lots
roads.
of stories on that, and on road closures, for instance. So the amount of stories that we got, like so many stories that are totally from different focus, which is also surprising for us, but also it is what it is. People are really frustrated from the education system.
The education system.
The education, also they are very frustrated from the energy cut, the loss of connections, jobs. Normal life that brings up like a message that people are depressed, and they are looking for their basic needs, which is food, security, electricity, education.
And are you still in contact with them now? I mean, you did this whole project, which was finished
I
about
got
a
lots
year
of followers on WhatsApp.
You have lots of followers on WhatsApp.
Facebook and
Facebook.
Instagram page, but not in direct contact with them, of course.
No.
I barely contact my family. No, I'm just kidding. But it is life is so, busy. But
I mean, we like to think the project sort of lives on in a way. Of course, we would love to keep talking to people and we would have liked to a million stories, because it's a country of 35 million people. So if I've got that right, but that people are kind of interested in the method and in, I think. Just the fact that Yemen, as you said, is more than a war.
Yeah, Yemen is more than a war.
As is every country,
exactly.
obviously.
Of course,
anywhere that you're
It's just
covering.
it's an example.
But I'm only speaking on behalf of what I have worked on.
Yeah, of
and Yeah, we carry those stories with us in every conference or in every podcast we do. We speak on not on their behalf. We bring up their voices.
Yeah.
We let the world hear what they have said.
Yeah.
We kind of let people hear what they said.
Can I ask, so but there was mentioned a podcast. Are you doing that as well? Can you,
Sure.
you have a few minutes left. So.
No, that's fine. I'll do that. We also, because we wanted to reach multiple audiences, several of the stories, most of them were sent in Arabic. We voiced them over in English, and we made them available to various podcasts.
Okay.
So we went on and did interviews. There was one episode with just me interviewing Nuha, but also an U.S. media, British media.
And where can we find it? If people was like, now I really want to listen to it.
If you really, really want to listen to it, you can probably find us on LinkedIn or Facebook, because they're all over at PRX, which is the US media. But the Yemen Listening Project, if you Google Yemen Listening Project, there's only one that I'm aware of.
Yeah, okay.
Thanks.
And for you, is there still one more? Yeah, there's one more burning question, please, on the front row.
My name is Nick. I'm also a journalist, and I was interested in all of your ideas about dealing with compassion fatigue. So, like, obviously, a lot of these wars they're going on for a long time. A lot of these issues that are going on for a long time, and like just thinking about the formats, which you think might be more effective. Maybe you chose this format.
Yeah.
Maybe it's a more effective format. Just how do we deal with this as journalists, also for audiences to not have, because there's a limit for the audience in terms of how much they can take, and that's what compassion fatigue is. So.
I mean, I think everyone's. This is the challenge of maybe. I don't know if it's a challenge of modern journalism. We like to say that, but I think it's maybe always a challenge of journalism. It's just that right now it's maybe coming from more ways because of social media, et cetera.
Well, it's coming from many ways.
Exactly, multiple or new ways. Yeah. But I think creativity helps think of how your audience wants to consume. How some people want a TikTok video, some people want a really low bandwidth website, some people want to get their stuff on WhatsApp, as they do in Yemen. I think meet people where they're at is the best answer. Think of what your audience wants, and then find them there.
And also what devices are available and so on. I mean, that's why you
mean
choose
of access.
The
possible mean of access.
Our programmer, we really challenged him because he had to test it on. He kept buying the oldest phones he could find, because to make sure it worked on these and on the lowest bandwidth internet. You don't have to. It doesn't have to be splashy, and it doesn't have to be multimedia to reach people.
Yeah, and we used also. Do you remember the Veya as they said? Talk to people who might be interested. Ask people to bring you people. So, like I when people used to approach me via WhatsApp, I told them, "Do you have a grandmother?" He said, yes. Could you ask her maybe this question and record her? So I'm interested in different ages, in
as
different,
well.
in
that's
diversity.
That's what you meant by inclusivity at the very beginning of the talk.
Inclusivity. So it is also an effort and creativity and asking people. People wouldn't mind, but sometimes they wouldn't be proactive. So, yeah.
Nearly there. One more questions for somebody, or you're all good? You're all good. Oh, I heard something. Patrick, to Will, let's try to wrap it up and finish it up. I know you're having a talk tonight at 6:45 up in the beautiful roof terrace on your book. What are you working on now?
I'm waiting to hear from my publisher right now.
Okay.
Fortunately, they liked the first two books. So possibly a book on Democratic Republic of Congo. But what I want to do is basically it's a country that's been treated the same way since colonization in 1885 by everyone who's gone there. In the Cold War, different colonizers, whatever. And I want to tell stories from different periods to show how far we have not progressed.
How far? Oh, that's a very uplifting ending of this panel.
But to do it like my other books, through the eyes of the investigators, the journalists,
Yes,
the
yeah.
victims
Yeah.
of it.
On the ground.
On the ground, yeah.
Yeah.
And try,
And you're there
basically,
to curate.
dramatic non-fiction is what I think I'm trying to do.
Oh, wow. Okay, thank you. And will we see like that you're listening to the project from other countries, or you stick to Yemen, or you might go
This
to?
is a question for her.
What's that? What were you
She
saying?
said it's a question for me.
Yeah.
We have just done sort of a shorter version in Lebanon, and we'll see. We've had requests from lots of places, so if funders are watching, no, I'm just kidding, but we'll see. I think you'll see it at least in our work as we continue, if not the exact format with 100 stories, at least the practices. I think for me the most important thing is to remember that, or one of the most important things is that, you know, we often hear the phrase giving voice to the voiceless, and I think people already have a voice. We just need to give them
I mean,
a
like the
platform.
voice to the voiceless, but you find that patronizing in a way. Or
Yeah,
what?
people,
Yeah.
they already have a voice.
They
The
do have a
Yemenis
voice, but
have
we
a
don't
voice.
hear it,
We're not
basically.
listening. So a good space for journalism to be in is to give space for that voice, to make a platform for that voice, and whatever, you know, whatever opportunity you have to do that.
Yes. We all have voices, it just need to be heard.
Yes, okay.
Yeah.
I think that's a very nice roundup of this hour. Thank you so much for being
Thanks
here.
for
Thanks
you
for
as
having
well.
us.
Okay, thank you.
Epstein. I can't believe your posture.